It had been 12 days since I watched the heart monitor flatline. 12 days since the world became unrecognizably quiet. My mother passed away in the same house she was born in, and I spent every second of those last weeks beside her, bathing her, feeding her, whispering stories to fill the heavy silence. When she finally exhaled her last breath, the house didn't echo with grief like I thought it might. It just felt empty. I thought my partner, Nora, would be my anchor through it all. We'd been together nearly 7 years, and she'd always said she admired the relationship I had with my mother. But when things got hard, really hard, she vanished. Her reasons were always just enough to seem reasonable. Work's been insane. Or, hospitals make me panicky. Or, my favorite, I don't want to remember her like this. I never pressed. I had bigger things to deal with. I buried my mom on a Friday morning, under a gentle drizzle that made the cemetery grass slick and the headstones shine like polished stone. Only a handful of people came. She'd been a quiet woman, not one for fanfare or fuss. I read the eulogy myself. Nora didn't show. She texted me 2 hours later with a single line. I thought it would be easier for you if I gave you space. When I got home that evening, all I wanted was to sit down with her, have her ask me how I was doing even if she already knew the answer. Instead, I found her curled on the couch, eyes glued to some reality show, half-empty wine glass dangling from her hand. I stood there for a few seconds, expecting her to turn, say something. She didn't. Eventually, I sat down beside her and reached into my jacket for the small box I'd kept in my pocket since the funeral. Inside was my mother's necklace. Nothing flashy, just a delicate silver chain with a locket she'd worn since her 20s. Inside the locket was a photo of her and my dad when they were still young and reckless and in love. It was the only thing of hers I'd kept. I held it in my palm like a relic, something sacred. Nora glanced at it and frowned. That's the one she always wore, right? I nodded, unsure how to explain the way holding it made my lungs ache and my throat close up. Well, she said, downing the last of her wine, at least she doesn't have to suffer anymore. She got up and left the room before I could say anything. I stared at the empty doorway for a long time. The next few days blurred together. I returned to work out of necessity, but I was only there in body. Clients talked at me. Emails piled up. At home, Nora moved like a phantom, there, but distant, colder than I'd ever seen her. I convinced myself it was grief. Maybe she missed my mother in her own way. Maybe she just didn't know how to comfort me. Maybe. On the 4th day back, I came home early. It was raining again. I walked in quietly, planning to surprise her with dinner. I stopped short when I heard voices from the kitchen. Nora was laughing, at something someone else was saying. A voice I didn't recognize, low and confident, too familiar. I stayed quiet in the hallway, half shielded by the wall. She was on the phone, wine in hand, legs curled under her like a teenager talking to a crush. God, you always make me feel so seen, she giggled, tracing her fingertip along the rim of her glass. It's like he doesn't even try anymore. Everything is about his mom now. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. There was a pause. No, he doesn't suspect anything. He's too wrapped up in his grief to notice what's right in front of him. She laughed again. I walked out the front door and sat in my car until the rain stopped. That night, I said nothing. We ate leftovers. She scrolled on her phone. I stared at the spot on the wall where we once talked about hanging photos from our trip to Spain. We never did. The frame sat unopened in the closet, probably still wrapped in tissue. Later, I tucked the necklace under my pillow. The next morning, I texted my sister to see if she still had the key to Mom's house. I needed a place to think. She did. When I left that evening, I told Nora I was heading to the grocery store. She didn't even look up from her phone. At the house, I walked through the quiet rooms, running my fingers along the furniture my mom refused to replace no matter how tattered it became. In the hallway, there was a photo of me at 6, missing a front tooth, arms wrapped around my mother's waist. I touched the frame gently, and for the first time since she passed, I let the sobs come. Eventually, I stopped crying. But I didn't leave. I stayed there for 2 days, telling Nora I was helping a friend move. She barely responded. On the 3rd night, I checked the bank account we shared. I wasn't expecting anything. Just curiosity. That's when I saw it. A $6,000 transfer to her personal checking account. My throat went dry. Over the next hour, I combed through 6 months of statements. Travel-sized withdrawals, odd amounts, each logged after she told me she was just grabbing coffee or picking up some groceries. Nearly $18,000, siphoned slowly like water from a leaking pipe. And suddenly, just like that, I was wide awake that I didn't go home that night. Instead, I sat in my mother's old recliner, lights off, the house humming around me with the soft creaks of age and memory. I stared at the banking app on my phone, watching the numbers sit there, unchanging, mocking. The lump in my throat had turned to something else now, something hard and simmering. By morning, I had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one. The first step was subtle. I texted Nora to say I'd caught a stomach bug and was crashing at my sister's place to avoid getting her sick. Her response was a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. No follow-up. No concern. Just that cold, digital gesture. That afternoon, I walked into the branch of our bank and quietly opened a new account in my name only. I didn't touch our joint funds, not yet. I wasn't ready to light the fuse. Over the next few days, I played my part. Came home when expected, nodded through Nora's stories about her coworkers' dating disasters, the new Pilates instructor who was way too intense, her debate over whether to get balayage or go full platinum. I started documenting everything: screenshots, receipts, strange little details she never imagined I was paying attention to. And every night, when she went to sleep, I slipped into the guest room and locked the door behind me. On the sixth night, I made a mistake. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was exactly what needed to happen. I forgot to close my laptop. Nora walked into the room around midnight, glass of water in hand, and saw the screen open to a folder titled Documentation. She didn't say anything. Just stood there, reading the file names. $18K transfers, affair call log, gaslighting screenshots. I froze. My heart jackhammered in my chest. She slowly lowered the glass to the desk. What is this? I could have lied. Could have said it was work stuff or therapy homework or some dark writing project. But I didn't. It's everything I've been ignoring for too long. Her face didn't flinch. It was like I'd told her the weather forecast. She turned and left without another word. No apology. No outrage. Nothing. The next morning, I found the necklace on the kitchen counter. It was broken. The chain had been snapped in two, and the locket was missing. My mother's locket. Gone. I tore through every drawer, cabinet, and closet. I checked the trash, the disposal, even the damn vacuum canister. Nothing. When I confronted her, she just shrugged. Maybe it was time you stopped clinging to the past. That was the moment something shifted in me. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I walked out of the apartment and didn't look back. I went straight to Marcus. Marcus and I hadn't spoken in over a year. We used to be close, college roommates, co-founders of a short-lived app we sold for just enough to pay off our student loans. He'd seen me through my worst breakup before Nora, and I saw him through a string of dead-end jobs and a brief engagement that exploded in spectacular fashion. When he opened the door and saw me standing there with nothing but a duffel bag and a tight-lipped expression, he didn't ask questions. Just stepped aside and let me in. For 3 nights, I crashed on his couch. We stayed up late talking, really talking about life, love, the things we never said out loud to our partners. And somewhere in that haze of honesty, I let slip that I hadn't cried at the funeral. Not really. I'd shed a few tears, yes, but I'd spent the whole time feeling like I was holding up a wall that was about to collapse. She'd hate seeing me like this, I said. She always told me to keep moving, no matter what. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he told me something that I still haven't fully unpacked. Nora hit on me once, he said, eyes on the floor. About a year ago. You were in the bathroom. She asked me if I ever thought about what life would have been like if I hadn't introduced you to. I didn't move. She was drunk, he added quickly. And I shut it down. But she meant it. That was the twist I didn't see coming. Not the affair. I'd already made peace with that. Not the money, the gaslighting, the slow erosion of my self-worth. No, this admission from someone I trusted, someone who had nothing to gain, rattled me in a way I didn't expect. She had been planting seeds of doubt everywhere. She'd poisoned my relationships one by one, subtly enough that I'd barely noticed the rot setting in. When I left Marcus's place the next day, I didn't go back to the apartment. I went to the storage unit where I'd quietly moved the rest of my mom's things a week earlier. I opened the unit, sat on the concrete floor, and stared at the boxes for what felt like hours. Then I found it. Taped to the inside of a jewelry box, tucked under a false bottom, was the spare locket. My mom had always been 10 steps ahead, even in death. Inside was a different photo. Not of her and Dad. It was me, 6 years old. Toothless grin. Smudges of dirt on my cheeks. Her handwriting on the back in looping cursive. Don't let anyone dim that light. Especially not someone who claims to love you. I clutched the locket in my hand until my knuckles went white. When I returned to the apartment, Nora was gone. Her closet had been half emptied, drawers pulled out, clothes scattered like someone left in a hurry. On the table was a note. Not an apology, not an explanation, just a single sentence. "You're going to regret this." I picked up the necklace she'd broken, pocketed the pieces, and locked the door behind me. The apartment felt like a hollow stage set, our life, carefully arranged and polished for guests, now frozen in the aftermath. I walked from room to room like a stranger, tracing the outlines of furniture she picked, shelves she insisted we install, decorations she swore made the space feel grown up. None of it felt real anymore. It was a museum to a life I'd bought into, brick by brick, with someone who had already decided it wasn't enough. I didn't hear from Nora for a week. The silence should have felt like peace. Instead, it throbbed with expectation, as if a storm were gathering just out of sight. I kept waiting for the thunderclap the moment everything shattered. In the meantime, I started packing. I moved my essentials to a small rental across town. One bedroom, narrow kitchen, scratchy carpet, nothing glamorous, but it was mine. I'd signed the lease in secret and paid 3 months in advance. I didn't take anything from the apartment that I hadn't personally bought. Not the couch, not the espresso machine she never let me touch, not the gold-rimmed mirror she loved taking selfies in front of. I left it all behind like a snake shedding its skin. But I took the locket. I wore it on a thin chain under my shirt, every day, a heartbeat reminder of who I used to be before Nora's words chipped away at me piece by piece. Then the email came. She hadn't called, hadn't texted, just an email with no subject line and a short body. "We need to talk. I know about the account. Don't think you're as clever as you think. We're not done." I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded it to my lawyer, an older man named Ellis who'd come highly recommended through a friend of a friend. Ellis was quiet, efficient, and had the demeanor of someone who'd seen every flavor of relationship catastrophe. He reminded me of the doctor who used to give me my allergy shots, gentle hands, but blunt with bad news. "She's trying to rattle you," he said, after skimming the email. "Let her. It doesn't change our strategy." And the strategy was simple. Wait. I'd already moved half of the joint assets into the new account. I had copies of everything: bank statements, screenshots of transfers, timestamped messages, voice memos from friends she'd manipulated. Even the digital receipt from the jeweler who repaired the locket, in case she tried to claim sentimental damages or some absurd form of theft. But Nora didn't want the money. Not really. She wanted control. And when I didn't give it to her, she escalated. It started with texts to mutual friends, subtle jabs implying I'd spiraled after the funeral. Then came the Instagram stories, carefully curated to show her laughing, smiling, surrounded by people, always captioned with vague allusions to freedom and healing from emotional abuse. I stayed quiet. I didn't post. I didn't engage. Then one morning I woke up to 6 missed calls from my boss. Nora had sent an email to my company's HR department claiming I'd been stealing funds, emotionally unstable, possibly dangerous. It was laughable, provably false, easily refuted. But for 48 hours, my professional reputation teetered on the edge. I was put on administrative leave pending review, a phrase that made my stomach twist even though I knew I'd done nothing wrong. Ellis was furious. "This is defamation. If we go to court, we push that angle hard." I should have been angry. I should have been livid. But mostly, I felt tired. So I went fishing. It sounds ridiculous, I know. Who goes fishing in the middle of a legal war zone? But it was something my mother used to do when life overwhelmed her: pack up a small cooler, grab an old rod, and head out to the lake. She called it pressing pause on the noise. The lake was just as I remembered it, quiet, overgrown at the edges, dragonflies skimming the water like little dancers. I baited the hook clumsily, hadn't done it in years, and cast a line. I didn't catch anything. I didn't care. I just sat there, locket warm against my chest, remembering her laugh. That night, I slept without waking up once. But the next morning, the storm arrived. I woke to dozens of messages. Missed calls. DMs. Even a voicemail from one of Nora's cousins I hadn't spoken to since our wedding reception. All saying the same thing. "Call me. She's saying you stole everything." My stomach dropped. I opened her Instagram. The latest post was a carousel of pictures, empty closets, bear counters, and a caption. "I came home to find he'd taken everything. My mother's jewelry, family heirlooms, even my laptop. He just vanished. Please, if anyone knows where he is, I'm worried about his mental health. This isn't like him." The comments were flooded with sympathy, offers of places to stay, promises to call if I see him. She was trying to turn my quiet exit into a kidnapping narrative. That's when I made my first public post in over a year. Just a photo, the locket, and the caption. She said I took everything. I left behind every item except the one that actually belonged to me. I didn't tag her. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. It spread like wildfire. Mutuals messaged me with apologies. Friends I thought I'd lost reached out, saying they always had a weird feeling about her but didn't know how to say it. And then came the message from someone I never expected to hear from again. Rachel. We dated in college, briefly, intensely, before the fire burned out. We'd lost touch when life pulled us in opposite directions. But she'd seen the post. Her message was simple. I'm so sorry. I hope you're okay. If you ever want to talk, I'm around. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. I like that. Rachel and I met for coffee the next afternoon. It wasn't romantic. Not at first. We sat at a small cafe near the university where we'd both spent too many nights pretending cheap wine made us smarter. She hadn't changed much, still wore her hair in that loose knot, still leaned in when you spoke like every word mattered. But there was a steadiness to her now that I didn't remember. A quiet patience. We didn't talk about Nora right away. We talked about jobs, about grief, about how the world felt louder now, somehow more impatient. And when I finally told her everything about the necklace, the money, the lies, the broken silence, she didn't flinch. She listened. She asked questions that weren't designed to poke at open wounds, but to understand where the scars had come from. I always thought she envied you, Rachel said after a long pause. Not just your relationship with your mom, but how intact you were. Solid. I don't think she ever really knew what to do with that. That stayed with me. That night, I went back to the rental and pulled out a small box I hadn't opened since moving. Inside was the copy of our wedding album Nora had insisted we make for show. Every photo looked staged. Even the ones where we were smiling, they felt brittle now, like glass already cracked. I dropped it off at the donation bin the next morning. By the end of the week, things had quieted. My job reinstated me after HR concluded the allegations were baseless. Ellis filed for formal divorce proceedings, citing financial deception and reputational damage. Nora's attempts to provoke a reaction dwindled into silence. And that's when the second twist hit. It came from Ellis. She's countersuing, he said flatly, eyes scanning a freshly faxed stack of papers. But that's not the surprise. I raised an eyebrow. I thought we'd covered every corner of absurdity already. She's using a new attorney, he continued, sliding a glossy page toward me. Look familiar? I picked it up, and my stomach dropped. It was Trevor, my estranged older brother. I hadn't spoken to him in 4 years, not since he called me a mama's boy at Thanksgiving and stormed out when Mom asked him to help with the dishes. We'd always been oil and water. He lived fast and loud, bounced between jobs, borrowed money he never paid back. Our mothers will left him nothing. Not out of spite, but because she knew he'd burn through it like he always did. Trevor was representing Nora in the divorce. Apparently they've been in contact for months, Ellis said, voice low. She listed him as a character witness, claiming she is family support. He's going to paint you as emotionally unstable, controlling, obsessed with your mother's legacy. I sat there, numb, staring at the paper like it might morph into something less surreal. Of all the betrayals, this one felt the most surgical, precise, deliberate. I called Rachel. She didn't hesitate. Come over, she said. We sat on her couch for hours, the locket resting cold against my chest like a stone. I told her everything about Trevor, the way he used to disappear for weeks and show up with excuses and demands. The time he pawned our dad's old camera without asking. The way Mom cried for days afterward but never stopped hoping he'd change. He found a way to profit from her death, I said, voice flat. I should have seen it coming. Rachel looked at me, unblinking. Then take it back, she said. Everything she tried to break in you, rebuild it. And don't let them twist the story. The next morning, I wrote a letter. Not to Nora. Not to Trevor. To Mom. It was 3 pages long. I told her about the necklace, the betrayal, the moments I wanted to collapse but didn't. I told her about Rachel. About the lake. About how I was trying, really trying, to be the man she raised me to be. I printed the letter and folded it into the locket's case, sealing it with tape. Then I went to the grave. I placed the letter in the dirt beside the stone. Sat there for an hour. Said nothing. When I stood, I felt lighter. A week later, Nora filed to withdraw the countersuit. Rumors began surfacing about Trevor, How he had borrowed money from Nora under the table, promising to make things right. How he'd asked for an advance from her new lawyer and disappeared. The last anyone heard, he was in Vegas, posting shirtless selfies and promoting a crypto scheme on Instagram. Ellis and I never even had to respond to the countersuit. It unraveled on its own. But what mattered more than legal wins or reputation was something I hadn't expected. Peace. It didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments. Coffee that stayed warm. Sleep that wasn't interrupted by nightmares. A quiet evening where I found myself actually humming, as I cooked dinner. I even started writing again. Rachel encouraged me. Said it was time I wrote my own story, instead of reacting to someone else's script. I didn't know what the story was yet, but I knew how it started. With a necklace. And the promise that no one, no matter how close, would ever make me feel small again. 3 months passed. That's how long it took for the divorce to finalize. 3 months of silence from Nora, who had once filled every room with commentary, complaints, corrections. The silence was strange at first, too wide, like standing in a room without furniture, but eventually it became something sacred. I learned to enjoy hearing myself think again. Ellis called on a Monday morning to say it was done. No more filings, no appeals. The judge had sided with our claim, awarding her a modest settlement and denying her spousal support due to the evidence of financial misconduct and defamation. Congratulations, Ellis said. You're free. Free. It didn't feel like a victory march. More like standing at the edge of a dock, toes hanging over, wondering if you're brave enough to jump into a different life. But I was. I already had. By then, Rachel had become a fixture in my life, not a replacement for anything, but a reminder that trust could be quiet and unassuming. We didn't rush. We went on walks, made lazy breakfasts, debated whether cereal counted as soup. She never asked me to be anything other than exactly what I was: grieving, healing, rebuilding. I think that's what saved me. One afternoon, I came home to find a small brown envelope on my doorstep. No return address. Inside was the broken chain from my mother's original necklace, the one Nora had snapped. No note. No explanation. Just the cold, delicate reminder of what had once been taken from me. I didn't throw it away. Instead, I brought it to a local jeweler, a woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes who didn't ask too many questions. I told her I wanted it fused with the new chain. Like a scar, I said. Part of the story. She understood. A week later, I picked it up. The two chains had been seamlessly joined, one polished and bright, the other weathered and bent, but together now, stronger. It rested heavy around my neck, like it had always belonged there. The next day, I drove back to the lake. It was early morning. Mist clung to the surface, and the only sounds were distant birdsong and the whisper of water against the shore. I brought no fishing rod, no cooler, just myself and a small folding chair. I sat where my mother used to sit, just beyond the tree line, where the shadows stretched long and the world felt still. And I talked to her. Not out loud. Just internally, the way we do with people who no longer need words. I told her everything. About Nora. About Trevor. About how close I'd come to forgetting who I was. And how I'd clawed my way back, inch by inch, thanks to people who refused to let me stay lost. I told her I missed her. That I hoped wherever she was, she knew the necklace was whole again. I stayed there for hours. Eventually, I got up and drove back to the apartment. Rachel was curled on the couch, reading, her glasses slipping slightly down her nose. She looked up, smiled like I'd just come home from war. How was it? Exactly what I needed, I said. Later that evening, we made pasta and danced in the kitchen to an old record she found at a thrift store. There was no agenda, no expectation, just the quiet comfort of movement, of breath, of being seen. I stepped away for a moment and looked around the room. It was filled with small things, mugs from garage sales, throw pillows that didn't match, books stacked haphazardly. But there was laughter too, and light, and none of it felt fake. That night, I couldn't sleep. So I opened my laptop and began to write. Not about Nora, not about the betrayal, but about my mother. About the woman who raised me to believe that kindness wasn't weakness, that silence didn't mean surrender, that no matter how badly people tried to break you, there was always something inside that remained untouched, waiting to be reclaimed. The words came fast. They always do when they're true. Sometime after 3 a.m., I closed the laptop and went to the mirror. I looked at myself, really looked, for the first time in years. I saw lines that hadn't been there before. But I also saw strength. The necklace glinted under the light, that subtle seam barely visible where the break had been mended. Not erased. preserved. I think that's the thing about healing. People always talk about bouncing back like you're supposed to return to the exact version of yourself that came before the pain. But that's not how it works. You don't go back. You become. You become someone new, not in spite of the break, but because of it. The final update came a week later. Zachary, yes, that Zachary, who I'd lost touch with during the Nora years, sent me a text out of nowhere. It was a screenshot. Trevor had been arrested in Arizona on charges of identity theft and fraud. Apparently, he'd been using Nora's personal and financial information to bankroll his gambling habit. Looks like karma remembered his name, Zachary wrote. I laughed harder than I had in months. I forwarded the screenshot to Ellis, who replied with a simple, well, that solves that. Nora never contacted me again. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she finally ran out of versions of the story where she was the victim. Or maybe, just maybe, she looked in the mirror one day and saw what she'd become. I'll never know. And I no longer care. The only reflection I focus on now is the one I see when I look in the mirror. And when I do, I see a man who survived the worst storm of his life with dignity intact. A man who learned to walk alone before choosing someone to walk beside. A man who wears his scars like armor, not shame. And above his heart, always, a mended chain that tells the whole story in silence.